Hello students, and welcome back to the Lore of the Iron Kingdoms with me, Professor Castor, and for all of us new students out there. This is a lore channel for the tabletop war game of Warmachine and the role-playing game of the Iron Kingdoms. And as mentioned last week, or earlier this week, we are actually taking a little side note into a completely different archive. That is the histories of Cygnar. It is going to be a very long video, as established, since we are going over the entire history of one of the most technologically and societally advanced nations in the Iron Kingdoms. So sit back and enjoy. We're going to be starting with the older lore, and then we were going to be updating the lore because there was a king's change between these two archives as well, switching from King Leto after he booted his brother off the throne, and then his nephew Julius taking over after he was found. So before we begin, thank you guys so much for showing up to class, and if you could please hit that like button, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. Please comment, that always helps us as well. And also please share these videos with any of your friends and fellow gamers alike. It does help spread the word about this channel and gets everybody into the rich lore that is the Iron Kingdoms, and kind of makes tabletop war games a little bit more fun, because then every character almost has an actual storyline to them. Also, thank you again, Steamforge Games, for letting us continue to read this fantastic lore, and without further ado, let's begin the histories of Cygnar. The Cygnaran military by rifle, cannon, and lightning. Cygnar's military prides itself on being the most disciplined, best trained, and best armed soldiers in Western Amoran. It has earned a reputation for defeating the enemies even while greatly outnumbered, with the emphasis on the quality rather than quantity of its infantry and warjacks. The army has changed considerably in recent years to incorporate gains from industrialization and mechanica, and now stands at the cutting edge of technological ingenuity applied to the arts of war. The Cygnaran army employs a combined arms approach to warfare with the emphasis on ranged firepower. Cygnar's warjacks include a broad spectrum of capability and incorporated sophisticated military-grade cortexes that allow them to function at high effectiveness, whether controlled by a warcaster or trained jack-marshals. The Cygnaran army delivers unrelenting fire at a distance by employing a large number of riflemen, such as long gunners and trenchers. These soldiers form the backbone of the army and make up the bulk of its numbers. Cygnar also maintains an impressive array of heavy infantry, including its famed Storm Knights. These armored fighters utilize mechanically augmented weaponry to deliver the power of lightning to Cygnar's enemies. Supporting these forces are units of specialized soldiers, such as field mechanics who maintain the nation's warjacks, the gun mages who join firearm and sorcery to devastating effect, and the rangers of the Cygnaran Reconnaissance Service, who are versed in the scouting, discerning enemy troop movements, and assisting in strike coordination. And then we have a little side note here, the Cygnaran Navy. The Cygnaran Navy is a vital aspect of Cygnar's military. Cygnar boasts the longest stretch of continuous shoreline of any of the Iron Kingdoms, and has a dubious distinction of sharing the broken coast with Crix. The responsibility for protecting these waters and the vital shipping between its many ports falls to the Navy, which is led by Novarch Gavan Trent. The Cygnar Navy has its own officer training facilities separate from the army and supervised by the Sentinel Point Naval Fortress south of Caspia. The Cygnaran Navy is divided into three distinct fleets, each led by a Lord Admiral, served by subordinate admirals. The Eastern Fleet, or the Caspian Fleet, based in Caspia, and charged with patrolling the Gulf of Cygnar. The Southern Fleet, based in Highgate and entrusted to defend the southern peninsula most directly threatened by Crix, and the Northern Fleet, based in Cyril and assigned to guard Cygnaran's northern waters against all threats, including the Ghodoran Navy. The Southern Fleet particularly works very closely with Cygnar's Third Army to protect the kingdom from Crix. Now back to the original reading. In addition to its own forces, Cygnar's wealth and resources have allowed it to establish long-standing relationships with many reputable professional mercenary companies. These soldiers for hire have never been relied upon to shoulder Cygnar's most vital interest, but they have augmented existing forces with their numbers and versatility. The mercenaries' tradition has ancient roots in the region, and Cygnar will hire only those who obey its strict contractual laws. Despite its status as a major power in the region, the last several years have been particularly difficult for the Cygnaran army. Surrounded on all sides they have endured several significant defeats. These include the failure to keep Lael from succumbing to the Khadoran invasion, and most recently the loss of Cygnar's own fortress in the Thornwood Forest. While these conflicts raged in the north and fighting in the south against the Protectorate of Menoth spilled from Sol into Caspia, the city was eventually secured, but its defenders have faced the unwelcome truth that even their great capital is not inviolable. Other threats have recently come to the attention of the Cygnaran military. Angry Trollkin Creels, who were driven from the Thornwood by ongoing conflicts and increased Crixian activity, seized lands from Cygnar's farmers and nobles and attacked the railroad lines. Attacks on these mainland and at sea by Crix have disrupted supply lines, terrified civilians, and divided the military's resources. There have been isolated cases of famine after farming was disrupted. In these grim times, officers must remind the troops to hold firm and remember that they are all that stands between Cygnar and destruction. Overt enemies are serious enough, but there are added dangers of strife from within. Not all Cygnaran defenders have the best interest of the kingdoms at heart. Some high-ranking nobles and officers have begun to conspire to exploit recent events for their own gains. And we have a little side panel I'm going to be showing on our video right here. It is the Cygnaran military structure. I'm not going to be going over every single thing because we're going to be reading about it. But it starts with King Leto Rathorn, or Raythorn. If you know how to pronounce it, just let me know in the comments below. It starts with him. Then we move on to Cygnar Army, Cygnar Navy, military advisors to the king, and then Cygnaran Reconnaissance Service, or service. They're special ops groups that do a lot of secretive things that sometimes the king doesn't even know about. Weird, isn't it? The Cygnaran army is made up of the 1st Army, 2nd Army, 3rd Army, and a 4th Army as well. The 1st Army is dedicated to the border with Khador, which makes sense since Khador likes to do seasonal wars, weirdly enough. The 2nd Army is the eastern border. As mentioned, they take care of I imagine they have to go up against the Protectorate a lot, since that is the border that lines up with the Bloodstone Marshes as well, or the Bloodstone Marches as well. So, and then the 3rd Army is the western and southern coast. These guys probably get to hang out with the Crix a lot. And then the 4th Army is the border with Ord, which I imagine is probably a little bit safer, since Ord uses a lot of mercenary companies that work with Cygnar relatively closely, so that makes sense. And then of course it is broken down even further there as well, with a bunch of little tiny armies with 2nd Division, 3rd Divisions, and so on and so forth, all the way down to a standard platoon sizes as well. You can pause the video here if you want to take a closer examination of how the Cygnaran military structure is broken up, but we will continue to move on. Shaping a modern military. The present shape of the Cygnaran army owes a great deal to the influence of its kings, past and present. The evolution into a modern military boasting the latest mechanical advances did not occur overnight. The freedom fighters who created the Colossals and fought to overthrow the Orgoth during the rebellion would hardly recognize the army as it stands today. After the rebellion, Cygnar's kings and generals presumed the Colossals would remain the mainstay in the military for the foreseeable future. This impression was reinforced during the reign of King Benewick II, when Khador invaded both Ord and Lael and sparked what would become the Colossals War, lasting from 250 to 257 AR, after the Corvus Treaties. Khador spent considerable resources building a number of these massive machines. Lacking their own Colossals, the armies of Lael and Ord would have been swept aside if not for the intervention of Cygnar, whose Colossals and controlling warcasters were equally formidable. The sight of these 40-foot-tall iron giants crashing into the Khadoran forces was awe-inspiring to the soldiers in the field, but they proved to be extremely expensive to produce and difficult to maintain, and they required a prohibitive amount of fuel to operate. The 7-year battle placed a severe strain on both the Cygnaran and Khadoran treasuries. After Benwick II was killed in battle, his successor Waldred the Diligent would later remark that the Colossal War ended more from mutual fatigue than any other factor. Suffering a decisive defeat and nearly bankrupt, Khador finally surrendered in the spring of 257 AR. And then we have a little side note here, the Strategic Academy. King Hector Sunbright IV left a lasting legacy by creating the Strategic Academy, or the SA. This institution has earned its reputation as the cornerstone of the Cygnaran army. The SA provides commissioned officers with a thorough background in military history, tactics, engineering, and philosophy. Its instructors also train cadets to endure the physical rigors of war, and to master the weapons used by the modern soldiers, such as rifles and pistols. Its foremost goals is to create leaders by developing its cadets intellectually, physically, and military, and ethically. In addition to training the regular officers, Academy staff also coordinate arcane instructions and research. The SA is tasked to locate, harness, and develop unique talents. For example, this institution oversees the Tempest Academy, which trains Cygnaran's renowned gun mages. The Cygnaran Army's warcaster training program is the smallest but most vital branch of the SA. Other less prominent branches include programs to train specialists such as military alchemists who produce munitions and field mechanics dedicated to warjack repair and fabrication. A separate branch, the Stormsmiths, are the evokers who can rely on technology to call down the fury of the heavens. Field mechanics and stormcallers are as vital to Cygnar's operation as its soldiers, and the hazards of their evocation earn them the respect of enlisted men and officers alike. The Strategic Academy is divided into two major campuses. The original grounds are within Caspia, located on the interior of the section of the Great Wall overlooking the Black River. Commander Adept Burke Kinbrace is the current chancellor, and under his expert supervision, the Academy has refined the nation's warcaster training program. The Caspian campus also focuses on teaching of military applications of mechanica, and they work closely with the Cygnaran Armory. The Point-Born branch is highly regarded. In some specific fields, its programs surpass Caspia's. It is at Point-Born that the Tempest Academy was created, and it is here that the majority of Cygnaran's gun mages train. In the modern era, more warcaster masters their craft at Point-Born than Caspia, and it is fully equipped for such tasks, including maintaining a number of older warjacks put aside specifically for apprentices and journeymen. Recently promoted following the fall of Northgard, General Shay Terswell was at Point-Born Chancellor for almost a decade. The new Chancellor has yet to be selected. And let's get back to our normal reading. The victorious Cygnaran and Ordic armies forced Kodor to dismantle its remaining colossals and the foundries that had built them. This appeared to give the Cygnaran military supremacy over this region, but the subsequent Second Trollkin War in 262 to 267 AR proved the limitations of the great constructs. During a series of difficult, pitched battles within the Forest of the Thornwood and the Gnarls, the Colossals were repeatedly bogged down in the dense and difficult terrain. Furthermore, with no large targets against which to leverage their might, and few permanent fortifications to besiege, the Colossals accomplished little. Cygnaran mechanics had already been working to develop more efficient and smaller machines, and the battles in this war demonstrated this was a crucial need. The first true warjacks were being assembled in Caspia by the end of the war, and soon became the mainstay of the militaries of Western Amorin. King Waldred finally decommissioned Cygnaran's Colossals in 286 AR. By the end of his lengthy reign, he had invested heavily in the infrastructure to create and innovate formidable fighting machines to stand alongside his kingdom's own soldiers in battle. Despite these mechanical innovations, for almost half of its history, Cygnar's rank-and-file military remained mired in feudal tradition. Large segments of its best-equipped and well-trained soldiers were men-at-arms and other liegemen sworn to various land nobles. The mustering of a strong army required the active cooperation of the most powerful citizens of the kingdom, who could use their importance to personal advantage. This tradition had not been entirely erased. Cygnaran's law allowed each noble family and estate to arm and command soldiers sworn to them. These laws still exist, but they have been revised and rewritten countless times to variously expand and reduce the rights of the nobles. King Hector Sunbright III, the Golden, who ruled in 406 to 426 AR, was instrumental in overhauling many of these laws and began the process of transforming the Cygnaran army into a modern military organization. In addition to creating the Strategic Academy to educate Cygnaran officers, King Hector reforms established a clearly defined chain of command for the Cygnaran army. He created the rank of Warmaster General to serve as a single voice to supervise and coordinate often contentious and opinionated generals. This king was concerned about the overlap between political clout and the military authority, and instituted measures to separate the two as much as possible without alienating the kingdom's most influential families. Toward this goal, King Hector's reforms limited the size and arms of the private armies serving the nobility. Lesser nobles were allowed small honor guards to protect their estates. Earls, dukes, and archdukes retained the liberty to keep larger armed retinues. These forces had proven to be a financial as well as political convenience, as such soldiers were housed and equipped from the nobles' coffers and were less a strain on the royal treasuries. The next major evolution of the military came under the direction of Warmaster General Winter Rathorn II, when he served King Grigor Malfast, both before and during the First Thornwood War. Rathorn continued his reforms after becoming king in 515 AR. He organized the Cygnaran army into its distinct bodies, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th armies, and demanded extensive training for every soldier. Winter II had no tolerance for inept soldiers on the field. King Winter II made it his priority to establish riflemen as a mainstay of Cygnaran's infantry. In the past, riflemen companies had been valued but were fielded in smaller numbers due to the high costs associated with outfitting and supplying them. In time, these riflemen benefited from improved weaponry and became the long gunners, which now comprise the largest branch of the Cygnaran army. The other cornerstone of Cygnar's infantry, the trenchers, were founded at the end of Winter II's reign and were greatly expanded under King Winter Rathorn III. Their grueling training regiment proved its effectiveness at the border skirmishes against Kodor following the Thornwood War. Winter III refined several now fundamental military doctrines, including the focus on delivering accurate long-range firepower. The development of the Defender and the Charger applied this philosophy to the nation's warjacks during this era. These powerful machines quickly became highly mobile and versatile replacements for cannon artillery batteries, which were difficult to move and position. Cygnar retained artillery but reserved its largest cannons for defensive batteries protecting fixed positions. Guided by the will of their warcasters, these new warjacks could advance onto the enemy and deliver fire at pinpoint accuracy, and enable Cygnaran forces to win battles before the enemy could even engage them. While Winter Rathorn IV is not remembered for his innovation, the Navy was further modernized during his rule as a direct result of the Scarred invasion in 584 and 588 AR. These battles against Krix defined the unique role of Cygnaran's Third Army, with its integrated ground and naval forces. The unpredictable nature of the Scarred invasion required constant vigilance and adaptability. Other measures of King Winter IV had long-lasting consequences. Winter's Inquisition publicly persecuted sorcerers while secretly targeting the perceived enemies of his regime. His actions resulted in the incarceration and often death of many arcane practitioners deemed potentially dangerous. This was a concern of Warmaster General Karsten Lattermore, who was eager to protect potential military assets from being caught up in the Inquisition's arrests. The Warmaster formally incorporated the gun mages into the arcane tempests into the Cygnaran army to shield them from the wrath of the Inquisition. Prior to this, the organization was a private and enigmatic brotherhood, but since joining the army, these gun sorcerers have gone on to become one of Cygnaran's most formidable special forces. After seizing the throne, Winter IV's younger brother Leto ushered in a new era of innovation. Or Letos? We'll call him Leto. Leto's interest in arcane technology had begun even before he was king, when he lent his support to the creation of the Stormblades. As king, he went much further to foster mechanical inventors like Sebastian Nemo to expand the role of the electrically enhanced weapons in Cygnaran's military tremendously. The searing power of the Storm Knights and the Stormsmiths has since become an inextricable part of Cygnaran's military mystique. One of the lesser-known consequences of King Leto's coup was the loosening of laws restricting nobles' rights and mustering private military forces. In the months leading up to the event, Warmaster General Leto had exploited his brother's disinterest in legal matters and adjusted these laws to facilitate the arming of his own supporters. He had not strengthened them as a king, seeing a boon to having small private armies in the employ of local earls or dukes, and that can be called out in times of need to confront unruly Trollkin scorn patrols and unexpected menaces. Given the scope and complexity of the myriad of threats against the Cygnarans military is engaged on a regular basis, it is likely the Army and Navy will continue to evolve in the months and years ahead. That the nation has endured and retained its strength is a testament to the foresight and planning of past kings and generals, along with the difficult choices made by its present leaders. Cygnar has learned to harness its military assets efficiently and to adapt to unprecedented challenges. But whereas once Cygnaran leaders felt safe within their borders and were accustomed to flexing the nation's might to aid distant allies, now they have to focus on self-preservation at all costs. And we have a side note here, the Church of Morrow. The Church of Morrow increasingly fights alongside Cygnar's armies. This has always been the case with the Third Army, whose vigilance against Crix is an area where the Church has demonstrated unwavering support. The Nightmare Empire represents everything the Morrowan faith condemns, and the powerful organization has no reservation committing its own soldiers and battle chaplains against it. Recently, the Church of Morrow joined the Second Army fighting the Menoths who invaded Caspia, and some soldiers directly serving the Church have even marched alongside soldiers of the First Army in its battles along the northern front. This has led some to question the actions of the Primarch Arius and his Cygnar-dominated exordium, the ruling council of exarchs of the Sanctum. The fact remains that the majority of Kodor citizens are Morrowans and look to the Vicari Council in Korsk for guidance. Several prominent exarchs are Kodoran-born and speak for their nation in Caspia. Despite this, the majority of the church's leading priests believe the Kodoran Empire has overreached its bounds and has acted against the tenets of the faith, particularly during the invasion of Lael. Even several prominent Kodoran Morrowan priests believe their empress has gone too far, although they are careful not to speak out openly against her policies. It seems inevitable the church will continue to align itself with Cygnaran interests. The Church of Morrow is an extremely influential and wealthy organization, and it boasts a substantial private military force, concentrated at the Sanctum. This city within the city includes its own army and smithies in addition to its small but highly trained force of soldiers dedicated to the faith. Outside the Archcourt Cathedral stands two towering and ornamented machines that are easily mistaken for statues. These are Armercus and Remeter? Say Remeter. The last two functioning colossals created during the rebellion. As the result of the Scarred invasion and the increased awareness of the Crixian threat, the church recently produced a small quantity of warjacks designed to its specifications, intended primarily for internal defense, but ready to be sent abroad to support warriors of the faith. Martial forces available to the church include several orders of knights and battle chaplains. The Precursor Knights are a specifically Cygnaran order based out of the Sanctum. Precursors follow the strict code of conduct in battle and seek out to ensure those slain in war receive sanctified burials. The Order of Illumination is a body of warriors, arcanists, and occult researchers who have devoted themselves to battling the forces of darkness, particularly necromancers and infernalism. With each passing month, it seems more likely the church will extend its untested strength in the wars abroad. They provide Cygnar with much-needed holy strength against its formidable enemies. And we look forward to getting into that infernalism that they were trying to stop. But let's continue. Army, rank, and file. While occasionally impressive are the established traditions of the Navy, enlistment to Cygnar's army has long been voluntary. Aside from the occasional use of penal battalions under previous sovereigns, King Leto has adamantly refused to impose conscription despite the urging of the Royal Assembly, on the grounds that soldiers forced to fight are never a match to resolve to those who freely choose to defend their nation. The fact that Cygnar's heartland is closer than ever to be threatened directly by Kodor has only increased the number of young people willing to enlist. In truth, there are currently more volunteers than Cygnar's training system can handle, and considerable efforts have been undertaken to expand all facilities, including calling on former officers to provide instruction. Anyone who has ever worn the Cygnus has been asked to don it once again and lend a hand. Not every man or woman in uniform will see actual combat. The army relies on a large number of individuals to produce and case munitions, and ensure uniforms, boots, food, and water are supplied to the trenches. These support teams are absolutely vital, and those serving in this capacity are well respected. Some who volunteer for military service do not make the cut. These individuals are encouraged to enter the militias in the townships or cities. Historically, militias have served as a secondary recruitment pool for the military, as training and experience gained there can smooth the transition of the best of these individuals to later join the army. Training varies considerable in duration and intensity from one branch of the army to the next on the training grounds throughout the kingdom. Long gunners have the shortest training cycle, as it is imperative that they get them to the field as quickly as possible. Every Cygnaran soldier, no matter what branch, is expected to endure exhaustive firing drills, physical conditioning, and instructing. Trenchers training lasts about 3 times as long as the gunner program and includes even more grueling drills to improve physical and mental endurance. Some of these techniques were originally created as a punitive measure to discipline insubordinate soldiers, and were expanded when they proved effective in creating soldiers capable of high performance in the midst of adverse conditions. Above the rank of major, officers are no longer strongly identified with a given branch of service. There are no trencher colonels, for example, since at this level of command the officers regularly supervise mixed forces. In some cases, individual officers may forego promotion in higher ranks because they wish to remain at a given level of command. Career military officers who view themselves primarily as battlefield soldiers favor the rank of captain and major, and we'll look more into those when we go into the normal rank and file of the Cygnaran forces in more specifics. But let's move on. The 4 armies. Cygnar is a large nation with the unfortunate reality of being surrounded by hostile powers. Each of the kingdom's 4 corners is isolated from the rest as much as imposing intervening geography as by distance, and requires dedicated military personnel to defend it against immediate threats. In recognition of this, the Cygnaran army is divided into 4 distinct armies, each tasked with a specific region. The task shipping and traveling made possible by the railroad network has forever changed by the 4 armies share resources and respond to unexpected threats. Still, the railway does not reach every city, and the reinforcement still requires time to muster, equip, and deploy. Soldiers sent from Cyril to Highgate, for example, must undertake a dangerous voyage along the broken coast, where the transport ships are at risk of attack from Crixian vessels. Even safer inland rails can experience unexpected dangers, such as when the March Bridge connecting northern and southern Cygnar was destroyed by Solminite saboteurs in 605 AR. Despite these hazards, Cygnar boasts impressive flexibility in delivering soldiers, warjacks, and unique assets like warcasters to any location necessary. A recently implemented telegraph system has almost eliminated the delay of messages sent between Caspia to remote fortifications. These efforts enable the king and his Warmaster General to stay current and to manage the complex task of troop deployment. The current supreme commander of the Cygnaran army is Warmaster General Ulson Turpin. Although his standing has diminished somewhat in the recent months, senior officers know Lord Commander Coleman Stryker has largely replaced the War Master General in his role as a primary military advisor to King Leto. Nonetheless, for any other than those soldiers serving in the Lord Commander's Storm Division, the War Master General still occupies the top position in the Army's chain of command. The First Army, the Northern Army. The First Army, sometimes referred to as the Northern Army, the Thornwood Army, or Northwatch, has traditionally shouldered the difficult responsibilities of defending Cygnar's northernmost border against Kodor. Since its establishment, the army has more combat than the other 3 armies combined. The fighting men and women of the First are rightfully proud of their singular expertise battling Cygnar's northern rival. At present, the First Army is experiencing its bleakest days of its history. Northgard has fallen, and with it the Thornwood. The last year has seen the army suffer heavy casualties despite the heroic efforts of those leading the retreat from the region. Losses run through the ranks. The moral and pride of the hardened border defenders has suffered, yet they are determined to regain what has been lost and prove they are neither cowed or broken. Until 605 AR, soldiers of the First regularly rotated into Lael's western border fortress as part of the long-standing cooperative effort alongside the Laelese army. While some of those soldiers resented the degree in which Lael relied on their presence, these rotations proved valuable experience and resulted in the close ties between officers of the allied armies. Veterans of the war in Lael witnessed the deaths of many comrades. among both their own ranks and their allies. The loss of Lael to Khador was only the first of several blows. Some hand-selected units of the first were sent behind enemy lines to provide covert support to the Lael's resistance efforts. A small number of those soldiers remained behind in Lael, operating cut off from the chain of command. Their superiors have not forgotten these units, but the higher priorities have left them effectively stranded. Some have joined with the Lael's resistance or have gone AWOL, seeking to find a new life for themselves on foreign soil. Others remain in sporadic contact with agents of the Cygnaran Reconnaissance Service and perform missions as required. After the surrender of Lael's capital in the summer of 605 AR, most Cygnaran forces withdrew to the extensive network of border defenses along the northern fringe of Thornwood. Khador proved it was not content with the swallowing of Lael and assaulted Cygnar's border directly. The First Army stood strong for over a year under the harshest conditions imaginable, reinforced continually from the capital and elsewhere in Cygnaran's interior. Northgard's vast network of barbed wire-lined trench and earthworks saw frequent clashes between Cygnaran trenchers and their counterparts across the barren and the crater-pocked wasteland separating them from Khador's Ravensguard. Northgard fought off a singular massive assault orchestrated by Commander Govolt Urusk in late 606 AR, a battle unequaled by its unremitting violence and the losses inflicted on both sides. While Cygnar won the day, it was by the narrowest of margins. Faced with a war on three fronts, Cygnar was unable to fully restore the region's tattered defenses. Khador's second assault on Northgard was crushing. Supreme Commandant Urusk and his forces had clearly learned from previous mistakes, and this attack was remarkable for the surgical precision with which Khadorans breached Northgard's walls and completely overran Cygnaran positions. As Nemo evacuated as many personnel as possible from the fortress, General Cathmore remained behind to fight the Khadorans to his last breath. This was a brave but ultimately futile gesture. The smaller northern border fortress fell soon after Northgard. Most agree the defeat came down to two factors: Cygnar's divided attention with so many soldiers embroiled in the Caspia Soul War, and the genius of the Supreme Commandant Urusk. Reacting quickly to the events at distant Northgard had never been practical, so it was not surprising that warjack support sent from Caspia did not arrive in time to join the main battle. Meanwhile, Khador was able to focus the majority of its might on Cygnar's northern border. Some members of the First remained at the fortified city of Felig, now entirely isolated from the rest of Cygnar. This garrison experienced the horror of a very different sort of Khadorran force attacking their gates. These were ravening madmen and berserkers, a frenzied army of bloodthirsty warriors led by none other than the Butcher of Kardav, Orus Zakhthavir. While the Butcher failed to penetrate the city's walls, it was severely wounded in the attack. His small force gutted the Cygnaran garrison and left the populace shaken. If not for the subsequent intervention of the Ordic army, Khador would likely have seized Felig. At present, this city's fate remains uncertain, but its citizens are safe for now, if reliant on the grace of King Bard II. By any meaningful measure, Felig is now held by Ord rather than Cygnar, even though some isolated soldiers of the First remain there awaiting orders. Khador appears to be content and the city is cut off from the Cygnar and has not sought to besiege it, perhaps wary and invoking Ordic retaliation at this stage of its conquest. And it looks like we have a little side note here we're going to read, just kind of break it up. The Cygnaran Reconnaissance Service. The Cygnaran Reconnaissance Service, or the CRS, has existed since the time of King Hector Sunbright III, but underwent a substantial expansion of duties early in King Leto's reign. The CRS was traditionally tasked with oversight Cygnar's military scouts and cartographers. This remains its acknowledged function, but King Leto broadened its purview to serve as Cygnar's intelligence gathering body. Its officers supervise the nation's convoluted network of spies, contacts, and informants, and it is thus a multi-layered organization including an active military branch fighting alongside Cygnar's army, as well as covert agents acting in secret. King Leto created the new mandate for the CRS following the dissolution of Cygnar's former spy network employed by King Ventur IV, which was dominated by the Inquisition. This network had been in place since the time of Ventur II, but had become thoroughly corrupt and self-serving by the time Leto came to power. It was determined that the CRS would provide the bedrock upon which to build a new clandestine organization. To lead the new CRS, King Leto created a rank of Scout General. a position that would report directly to the king and coordinate the activities of the Rangers with the office of the War Master General. The current Scout General is a man Leto first appointed Bolden Ribald, a former knight of the Highgate Vigil, who had proven his dedication and service alongside the Third Army. The bulk of the CRS are Rangers fighting in the field alongside other elements of Cygnar's 4 armies. The Rangers operate in self-contained teams seldom larger than a squad level. Their esteemed Swift Sergeants are the pinnacle of their fighting ranks. Most commissioned officers in the CRS do not serve in the field but instead coordinate the missions, intelligence gathering, and intelligent analysis of Rangers and field agents. There are exceptions such as the Captain Jeremiah Cray, who standing as a warcaster puts him outside of normal hierarchy. Agents in the field report to the ranking CRS handlers and are supported by networks of safe houses as well as secret arm caches within and outside of Cygnar. CRS agents often rely on complex coded messages and other clandestine means of contact. Most active CRS agents hold ranks between lieutenant and major. Field agents are tasked with creating personnel networks of contacts and informants, including recruitment those who can work and live on foreign soil. They are expected to report regularly to a liaison to keep information flowing and to receive specific orders. CRS colonels supervise the liaison, and are no commanders or other generals in the CRS. As Cygnar's premier spy agency, the CRS is interested in domestic and foreign affairs, anything that threatens the peace and welfare of the nation. The CRS has succeeded in infiltrating trade, religion, and criminal organizations, as well as commissioning foreign governments and military structures. Due to the shifting loyalties of informants, the CRS takes pains to substantiate intelligence, sometimes delaying release of information until it can be confirmed. You know, that's one of the things I did not know about Cray, because Jeremiah Cray always looks so tired, but I didn't even realize that he was a CRS agent. Things you learn when you're reading the archives, huh? I'm curious if any of this information would be considered highly classified. Well, here we are reading anyway, so I imagine it's been declassified. I wonder where Cray is now. We'll find out in the future. Let's continue. The First Army regrouped along the Dragon's Tongue River. Their defenses are anchored in the west by Point Bourne and in the east by Corvus. Both of these cities have been important elements of the Cygnaran supply chain before the loss of the Thornwood, and were protected by substantial garrisons. Additionally, Point Bourne is one of Cygnar's most important sites for military training. These cities were already highly fortified, with substantial walls, heavy cannons, and other defenses. Despite this, the large civilian population is not pleased to have the front lines so close to their doorstep. The Cadoran army has added to tensions by constructing new fortifications along the rivers opposite the Cygnarans. Even though Kodor and Cygnar have refrained from major actions in the interim, periodic clashes between the isolated groups, exchanges of sniper fire, and occasional artillery attacks are almost daily occurrences. It seems inevitable that the full-scale battle will soon resume. Cygnar's northern generals cannot allow the enemy to consolidate its supply lines or build more formidable fortifications so close to major cities. The Thornwood must be reclaimed. The command structure of the First Army is intact but badly strained after so many casualties and shifts in personnel. Lord General Alan Duggan still leads the First Army. He has retained his title of Duke in the Northwood, but all his lands and those of his vassals are now in Cadoran hands. The Lord General was stationed at a small fortress east of Phalig when the city was attacked and was able to aid in the retreat from Northgard. The command staff is still recovering from the loss of several leading officers, most notably General Hagen Cathmore and Dargus Mathern. General Mathern died from an infected wound after the Phalig assault, and Cathmore was cut down by Karchev the Terrible. Cathmore's title of Earl of Bloodbane passed to his eldest son, who is a young lieutenant in the first, but that swampy region is now firmly in Cadoran hands. Lord General Duggan is stationed alongside the newly promoted General Shay Terswell at Point Bourne, where they oversee the First Army's western forces. The eastern portion of the army is under the capable direction of General Sebastian Nemo and Galt Langworth at Corvus. Another significant concentration of First Army soldiers is operating out of Stonebridge Castle under the command of General Creelin Crismore, formerly stationed at Deepwood Tower. A number of soldiers from Lord Commander Stryker's reconstructed Storm Division have joined the defenders in this region. The beleaguered state of the First Army has required reinforcements be sent from elsewhere. These include most notably and numerously a large contingent of the Fourth Army, once stationed farther in the west Fort Balton. A large number of these soldiers have been sent to post along the border and have provided much needed manpower. Not all officers of the First are happy with this arrangement. The Fourth is suspected of numerous indiscretions and its officers are not well trusted. Affording more hope than these reinforcements is the presence of many Cygnar's most esteemed and respected warcasters. This concentration may shift if fighting should flare up elsewhere, but for the moment many of Cygnar's warcasters stand alongside the First Army. And before we move on, looks like we have a little side note here. Northguard Gravediggers, 95th Trencher Company, 101st Infantry Battalion, 3rd Division, 1st Army. And this is a makeup of this army. One of the most legendary companies of the First Army, the 95th Trencher Company, has a decidedly grim reputation. Numerous times it has been nearly annihilated in battle, only to rise again with fresh troops eager to risk their lives and stand in the company of past heroes. These soldiers have sworn not to rest until they retake the Thornwood. The 95th was once part of the 1st Division and served General Hagen Cathmore, but in the wake of the losses suffered at Northguard, that division ceased to exist. These presently served under the 3rd Division, led by General Kirlar Kersmore, and are assigned to the ever-expanding trenchwork and fortifications surrounding Stonebridge Castle, a vital point of defense along the river east of Point Bourne. Now more than ever, the 95th is considered the embodiment of what it means to serve as a trencher. It boasts a long and storied history of battles against Kodor, having been first created before the First Thornwood War. The company fought as part of a regiment that reinforced Colonel Drake Cathmore's forces after his heroic death at the Battle of the Tongue. In the decades that followed, they fought in many border skirmishes against both the Kodoran regular army and mercenaries in Kodor's deploy. The company has performed with conspicuous gallantry after the withdrawal of Morrow at the end of the war in Lale. They suffered the loss of 7 and 10 men as they battled to drive off the Kodorans trying to circumvent Northguard. One of those who survived the bloody engagement was Master Sergeant Maxwell Finn, who was singled out for a field promotion straight to captain. The 95th was present for Gervalt Ursk's massive attack in Northguard, and they suffered high casualties in both. Not entirely restored to full strength by the time of the second attack, they stood directly in the path of the onslaught. Despite heroic efforts, in the end the company was overrun, even as the fortress itself was taken and the defenders forced to retreat south into the forest. So thoroughly were their trenchworks compromised that surviving members of the old regiment thought the 95th was completely lost. Captain Maxwell Finn was credited for rescuing a number of the survivors of the company and leading their return to Corvus in the harrowing several-week journey. Starting with the survivors, a number of whom had once belonged to other elements of the 1st Division, the company was restored to its fighting strength. For now, they hold the line at the Dragon's Tongue River and prevent further lands from falling to the Kodoran Empire. And they actually have all their leadership and assets, so we're going to read through those because that's always fun. Leadership, Captain Maxwell Finn. Lieutenants, Boyd, Brigsby, Cartington, Clapson, Livermore, Rolfe, Stiles, and Varnway. And then they have 42 sergeants that are unnamed. Their assets include 214 trenchers, 86 trench commandos, 28 snipers, 18 grenadier porters, 9 commando scattergunners, 6 chain gunner crews, 6 cannon gunner crews, and 4 grenadier light warjacks. This is a very, well, I'm going to say lightly done up army. Very small, of course. So that's very interesting. Anybody who wants to set this army up on the field, this actually would be kind of cool, having a full trencher battalion. Now, of course, the amount of models to make up this entire 95th Trencher Company would be pretty astounding, but it'd be fun to see. Or at least, little small forces of it. But let's continue our reading. The Second Army, the Army of the Black River. The Second Army, sometimes referred to as the Caspian Army or the Eastern Army or the Army of the Black River, defends the eastern border and maintains a large garrison at the capital and smaller forces at Fort Falk and East Wall. It has traditionally defended Corvus as well, but with the changes of the northern border, that city is now home to soldiers of the First Army. Several formerly Second Army battalions remained in the city, but were transferred to the First. While relying on a backbone of long gunners and trenchers, the Second Army includes the largest proportion of heavy infantry and cavalry in the Cygnaran army, including veteran storm and sword knights. Many of the ranking officers of these companies are the vassals of nobles sitting at the Cygnaran Royal Assembly. With the Cygnaran army in Caspia, the Second Army also boasts substantial warjack support and often serves as a testing ground for new chassis and weapon designs. Repair and resupply of these garrisons are considerably faster and easier for Cygnar's other armies, thanks to the commercial and industrial might of the capital. Like its peers elsewhere, Cygnar's eastern border defenders have had to deal with constant strife and warfare over the last several years, and this has prompted widespread reorganization of personnel and continuous recruitment to replace the fallen. The Second Army experienced a short but welcome reprieve after the death of Hierarch Voil. Cygnaran intelligence suggests that the Protectorate of Menoths remains active, but that its leader have shifted their focus to its northern crusade and eastern Lael. A number of personnel formerly stationed in Caspia during the height of the Caspian Civil War have been since transferred to other posts. The wild fluctuation in the needs of the Second Army are part of a long history dating back to the end of the Cygnaran Civil War in 484 AR. In its early history, the Protectorate was distracted by subjugating the Idrian tribes of the region, but it did not take long for these zealots to threaten the security of the eastern Cygnar once again. Depending on the state of affairs between Cygnar and its Protectorate, the Second Army has variously been reduced or expanded, yet even during the most peaceful interludes, Cygnar has maintained a substantial force to guard the eastern borders and its high priority in Caspia. The Second Army was at its largest during the Caspian Civil War in 606 to 607 AR. This was a lengthy conflict that caused extensive damage to both cities. Preceding the war in Otstesh in 605 AR, the Protectorate mounted a failed assault on Caspia's gates. Tensions did not escalate to full war until Cygnar succeeded in breaching Sol walls in Rowan in 606 AR. Before this accomplishment, these walls were considered inviolable, and to breach was achieved only after a month-long concentrated cannon barrage orchestrated by Marcus Siege Brisbane. Lord Commander Coleman Stryker was assigned to the 6th Division, soon called the Storm Division, of the 2nd Army and took charge of the offensive. He hoped to subdue the streets of Seoul quickly. Unfortunately, the Mennite resistance proved to be far greater than anticipated, as the Protectorate had already been in preparation for their own attack on Caspia. Cygnar seized the initiative and fought almost to the center of the city, but there the Mennites rallied and managed to defend the great temple of the Creator. From this point forward, the battles became more entrenched and devolved into a year-long series of street-to-street battles with no clear advantage on either side. The war required an almost complete dedication of the army, and more soldiers were reassigned to the 6th Division, leaving other garrisons with fewer personnel. The fortresses were later beset by attacks from the Scorn, who had been gathering in the Bloodstone Marches east of the river and north of the Protectorate. The Scorn did not succeed in penetrating Cygnar's border defenses, but inflicted heavy casualties, particularly during the massive attack at Fort Falk late in the month of Rowan in 607 AR. For the Army's command staff, the circumstances of the war in Seoul were unusual. Lord Commander Stryker's Storm Division had absorbed the lion's share of the Second Army's personnel and resources. The General of the Second were regulated to largely bureaucratic functions, as their authority was usurped by the needs of the commanders in the field. The Caspia Seoul War took a dark turn for Cygnar and Solish of 607 AR, when Lord Commander Stryker was almost killed during the collapse of a burning temple. He was taken to the sanctum of Caspia, where he lay incapacitated for many weeks as Priest of Morrow attended his wounds. During this period, the Protectorate gained the upper hand. Control of Caspia's eastern gate was seized before they could be sealed against the Mennites, who fought their way into the Cygnaran capital for the first time since the Civil War. The situation worsened when the Protectorate's sovereign Hierarch Voil marched from Immer with additional reinforcements. Calling upon his considerable personal powers and invoking miracles from the creator of man, this seemingly unstoppable Mennonite priest and his army very nearly succeeded in its goal of conquering Caspia. The still recovering Lord Commander Stryker forced himself from his sickbed and marched to confront Hierarch Voil, joining King Leto, Morrowind forces provided by the Sanctum and the Knights of the Second. Their first clash with Voil's forces ended disastrously when the Hierarch delivered a grievous wound to King Leto and forced the Cygnarans to retreat. After ensuring the safety of the king, Lord Stryker and his knights regrouped for a second attack. Then followed an epic confrontation, which ended only when Lord Stryker succeeded at last in striking down the Mennonite leader and a man whom both sides had begun to believe was invincible. The death of Hierarch by Lord Stryker's hand quelled the fighting spirit of the Mennonites, and though they were allowed to withdraw to Seoul to seal their gates, clashes north of the Twin Cities have flared up periodically and seemed likely to continue even if the gates of Caspia and Seoul remained sealed. And that fight actually was very interesting because the Harbinger actually assisted Lord Stryker by striking down Lord Voil, or the Mennonite priest Lord Voil, because he was definitely almost indestructible. But the Harbinger's sword never misses, because it's of course guided by Menoth's will and whatever they say about it. While Lord Stryker remained a beloved hero of this army, his Storm Division has been officially recognized and granted autonomy. As part of the restructuring following the war, the Storm Division was reduced in size to suit its new role as a mobile strike force outside the command structure of the Second Army. Some troops were deployed elsewhere, such as the northern border, while others remained in Caspia to defend the capital. The chain of command that was disrupted while Stryker waged his war against the Mennonites has been restored. Lord General Wigan Hester leads the Second Army from his Caspian headquarters, where he is a regular contact with the Warmaster General. The new 8th Division that replaced Stryker's 6th is led by General Artuis Halstead. A sizable portion of the eastern border is watched over by General Alain Runewood, whose 7th Division is garrisoned at East Wall. The northern patrol of this border are under the charge of General Keelan Ebenhart IV, who commands the 12th Division from Fort Falk, having moved his headquarters there from Corvus. The Third Army, the Army of the Wormwall. Cygnar's Third Army, also called the Southern Army or the Army of the Highgate or the Army of the Wormwall, is based out of Highgate and is responsible for protecting the southern shores, primarily from Crixian attacks. While these defenders have only borne the symbol of the Third for a century, they are inheritors of the tradition that stretches back more than 1,000 years. There are no soldiers in Cygnar better versed in Crixian fighting tactics, and it is from this army of the Cygnaran generals seek to advise on battling the horrors of the Nightmare Empire. Given the ability of Crixian forces to strike and vanish without warning, this duty has always been a challenge, and in recent years, the threat has escalated as Crixian activity has reached unprecedented levels. All of Cygnar's citizens appreciate the brave warriors who fight the terrors of Crix almost daily. Operationally, the Third is very different from the other armies of Cygnar, as no other army works as closely with the Cygnaran Navy. Both Army and Navy personnel are tightly integrated and are accustomed to joint operations. The admirals of the Southern Fleet stationed at Highgate answer directly to Lord General Vincent Golan, in addition to obeying their Lord Admiral. An unusual but effective arrangement. At times, vessels from both the Northern and Eastern fleets also join in these operations. The first and preferred tactics of fighting Crix is engagement at sea. The Navy seeks to intercept Crixian ships and sink them before they can land raiders ashore. Given this length of the coastline and the limits of the manpower, it is unfortunately impossible to stop all, or even most, of the raids. Crixian's diversionary tactics make it difficult to place forces in the best positions, and the island nation is more than willing to sacrifice ships for this purpose. Even the infamous black ships are sometimes used as the feints, which Cygnar cannot afford to ignore, and these formidable supernatural vessels require tremendous firepower to engage with any hope for victory. The Third is always prepared to take the fight to the enemy and has been known to strike Crixian fortifications on islands closer to the Cygnar shores. Companies that carry out these counterattacks prefer to employ light warjacks over heavies for the ease of deployment. land garrisons are well equipped with heavy jacks, including a number of invaluable defenders and cyclones. The third has recently had to get by with less support from warcasters due to the requirements of the wars of the other fronts, and for this reason this made the training of qualified combat-ready jack marshals a high priority. Historically, the Third was at its greatest strength during the Scarred Invasion, under the reign of Vinter Rathorn IV. During this conflict, it was the other armies that found themselves reduced in number to support the Third's escalating war with Crix. Both King Vinter IV and Warmaster General Leto Rathorn led soldiers in this war, and those units that fought directly alongside the royals maintained honors to commemorate the service to the Rathorn line. The soldiers of the 121st Regiment are known as Leto's Own, after they have fought in a number of engagements led by the Prince from 587 to 588 AR. The soldiers of the 98th Infantry Battalion call themselves Vinter's Bastards, having fought alongside their former liege during the landing at Giant's Head, which ended the war. The battle was the last time the famous sword Kingslayer was drawn to defend Cygnaran soil against foreign enemies. These toughened veterans feel no shame utilizing Vinter's name, since they invoke the memory of the king's ruthlessness in war rather than his reputation for tyranny. Before the Scarred Invasion, Cygnar's coastal defenders had drastically underestimated the threat posed by Crix. Very little was known about the true military might. It has been a general belief that Crixian raids were random attacks, the actions of pirates, raiders, and lone necromancers operating out of the Blackwater and Dregsport, or skirmishes with the Satix's vessels that were not thought to be part of more organized efforts. After the Scarred Invasion, Cygnar became more proactive in scouring nearby islands clean of the Crixian bases. Unfortunately, it was not until the deeper analysis afforded by the Hirschwallen report in 605 AR that the Cygnaran military realized how thoroughly coastal efforts had failed. Officers of the Third and those of the Southern Fleet contributed substantially to this thorough analysis of the Crixian threat. Its findings were bleak. The entire Scarred Invasion has now been understood to have been an elaborate sequence of deceptions to allow Crix to gain a foothold inland. These insidious elements were not discovered until they joined in open conflict at the war in Lael. Cygnar has had to face an unpleasant reality that Crix now has a permanent presence in Western Amoran interior. They will not easily be removed from their mainland bases, few of which have been located. Activity has been particularly high near the Thornwood. It is cold comfort that Crixian forces their prey on the Cadorans with equal ferocity. The King's War Council has concluded that a sizable Crixian force is operating out of this region. Whether these forces rely on resupply from Crix is unknown. Whatever the case, Crixian attacks are no longer a threat solely to the coast. While the defenses of the coastal communities and trade lanes are top priority of the Third Army, these soldiers are highly valued for their experience in fighting Crix. Senior officers of the Third are often sent to advise the commanders of other armies in the battles against the undead. Those warcasters who have served with the Third Army are among the most proficient military assets available to counter the threat posed by Crix. Starting in 607 AR, the Third Army and Cygnar's Navy began a fresh offensive against Crix in the hopes of doing lasting damage to its fleets. Towards this end, Cygnar has also preferred cooperative attacks alongside the Ordic Royal Navy. While Ord maintains neutrality in the war between Kodor and Cygnar, it has proven willing to fight Crix, whose predation threatens its own communities as well. Thus far, attacks on the Crixian ships and outer islands fortifications have a mixed result. Cooperation with Ord became complicated after preparatory fleet maneuvers drew the attention of the Gadoran Navy. This led to several mixed naval engagements where Ordic warships exchanged fire with those of Kodor. Bluster from the Gadoran capital after the loss of several of its vessels has made Ordic admirals reluctant to continue participation for fear of undermining their nation's neutrality. When several assaults deeper in Crixian territory carried severe casualties, many high-ranking Cygnaran officers started to question whether they were doing more harm than good. It is widely believed that these efforts will never bear fruit while the bulk of the Cygnaran army is devoted to the defense of the northern border. Despite setbacks, officers of the Third firmly believe that the enemy must be confronted. Their citizens must be protected from the horrors spawning from the islands southwest of Cygnar's waters. Yet until the more effective strategy emerges and Cygnar can devote the necessary manpower, the The soldiers of the Third fight a desperate battle. There is no greater demonstration of bravery than their perseverance, even knowing the efforts could be futile. For 30 years, the Third Army has been led by Lord General Vincent Golan, Earl of the Shield Point, Senior Knight of the Prophet, and Commander of the Knights of the Highgate Vigil. While he is past his prime and suffering from poor health, Lord General Golan is the living legend of the Third, respected on both servants of Morrow as well as a determined enemy of Crix. Despite the esteem with which a venerable Lord General is held, there are those who are eager to see younger blood and fresh ideas. For now, Lord General Golan supervises the Army's complex fleets and land engagements from Highgate, the primary bastion of the Third. Auxiliary garrisons exist in numerous forts along the western coast, with concentrations at Westwatch and the southern ports of Mercer. General Boris Gately works closely with the Lord General and supervises the large 9th Division, which includes a majority of the Army's active service personnel. Senior Commander Evelyn Turpin, the granddaughter of the War Master General, commands the 14th Division, which includes both the reserves and the battle-ready patrols that scour the Warmwall Mountains for threats to the realm. She has proven worthy of her responsibilities and demonstrates of a shrewd logistic mind, achieving more with less. A little side note here, Cygnar Army Honors and Awards. And of course we will have a picture on here. Distinguished Service Up to the Crown, one of the most long-standing honors in Cygnar. This award is granted for exceptional service in the armed conflict. King Benedict the Bold initiated it shortly after the Corvus Treaties. Star of Valor. The star is awarded for conspicuous valor against the enemies in a time of war during a protracted engagement. The medal is often combined with knighthood, and it bears the visage of Colonel Drake Cathmore, who gave his life at the Battle of the Tongue in 511 AR. Medal of Heroic Sacrifice. Often awarded posthumously, the honor recognizes those who suffered grievous injuries while performing valiantly in battle. The award includes a lifelong stipend to survivors or families of the slain, paid jointly by the Army and the Church of Morrow. Royal Order of the Cygnus, the highest honor awarded by Cygnar. This medal always includes land and elevation as a Knight of Cygnar. It is awarded for heroism far beyond the call of duty. And let's get back to it. The Fourth Army, the Army of the Dragon's Tongue. Cygnar's Fourth Army is also called the Western Army, or the Army of the Dragon's Tongue. It is the smallest and least esteemed of Cygnar's armies, having historically been a reserve force. Cygnar's kings have considered it important to watch all borders, and the Fourth Army has the task of patrolling the nation's borders with Ord, a friendly nation. Recent events have brought the Fourth Army out from its seclusion of Fort Bolton, and they will certainly play a significant role in the days ahead. Ord and Cygnar have a long history of mutual interest in profitable trade. The closest of the two nations came to violence was a dispute over whether the city of the Five Fingers should be considered an Ordic or Cygnaran settlement, a conflict that arose after the Colossal War ending in 257 AR. This dispute was settled peacefully when Cygnar withdrew its claim in the interest of maintaining a united front with Ord against Kodor. Indeed, Cygnar and Ordic military forces have briefly allied during several conflicts, including the Colossal War and the Second Expansion War in 464 to 468 AR, after Kodor seized the Ordic city of Corbin. The Fourth Army did not exist during these years, but its soldiers consider these engagements as part of their history. Some companies have adopted the nicknames and carry banners inspired by this era. Similarly, there is a strong sentiment for Thurian pride in the Fourth, and as many soldiers look fondly at the history of the ancient kingdom, whose descendants are now divided between Ord and Cygnar. This is part of a general tradition that romanticizes the time before the Orgoth. While the Fourth have been less involved in Cygnar's major wars, they are credited with helping maintain peace and security in the region around Serral. Its soldiers have fought in numerous small engagements against well-armed bandit forces and disreputable mercenary companies operated in the region, including the outlaws who take advantage of the relaxed border with Ord. East of Serral, it is an impenetrable forest called the Gnarls, and north of the Dragon's Tongue rivers is the Ordic counterpart, the Olgenholt. Both forests are wild and untamed places known to be refuges for criminals, savage Tharn tribes, and unfriendly Trollkin Creoles. Confronting these enemies has required the soldiers of the fort to employ unconventional tactics and strategies, including ones that would have been considered unthinkable elsewhere in the Cygnaran army. In one recent incident still under investigation, 2 companies of the 4th confronted a mercenary company called the Hagen Blades. In the ensuing battle, the Blades were killed to the last man. Some called this a slaughter, while others considered it an example of what happens to mercenaries who betray Cygnar for foreign gold. Indeed, the 4th Army has attained a decidedly sordid reputation. As Cygnar's largest reserve force, it has been utilized as a dumping ground for undesirable soldiers. It has regularly been tasked to accept both enlisted soldiers and officers deemed insubordinate or troublesome, but not incompetent enough to be booted out of the service. While these elements represent only a fraction of the army, there is no question the 4th has more incidents of criminal behavior than the rest of the army as a whole, including extortion, graft, accepting bribes, misallocation of military resources, looting, and violence against civilians. That explains why the 1st Army was not super excited when these guys came to help them. That actually makes a lot of sense now. The 4th recently came under criticism for not responding promptly to requests to send reinforcements to the front. This army was notably absent from the war in Lael and the subsequent fighting in the Thornwood. The majority of these soldiers are patriots, but they are beholden to the dictates of their officers and General Graelyn Deckley, who rumors suggest favors the Duke of Thuria over Warmaster General Turpin. The Crown has been too distracted by higher priorities to properly investigate these rumors, particularly as the recent months of the 4th has demonstrated greater willingness to comply. After the fall of Northgard and the loss of the Thornwood, the bulk of the 4th was ordered east to reinforce Point Bourne, Stonebridge Castle, Corvus, and points between. The smaller force remained at Fort Bolton to maintain the defense of Serral. While the added manpower is appreciated by the beleaguered 1st Army, tensions between the soldiers of these 2 forces linger. Duke Mehu Durgil of Thuria has been a thorn in King Leto's side, one of the realm's least cooperative nobles, and a man who once loyally served Vinter IV. In the political circle, the northwestern region is well known that General Deckley of the 4th Army frequently answers to the Duke's summons and that the 2 are close friends. This has led some nobles to disparagingly refer to Deckley as the Duke's pocket general. For these reasons, the sudden willingness of General Deckley to reinforce garrisons elsewhere was unexpected and prompted some suspicion of the King's War Council. Most of the Royal Assembly consider the Duke's sudden enthusiasm for the war explained by a selfish desire to protect his interests that might be harmed by Cadoran incursions. King Leto and Scout General Rebald have every reason to suspect the deeper motives, and they have sent agents to investigate, but have found no clear evidence of misdeeds. If they knew the full scope of treason they face from the quarter, they might disband the entire 4th Army, or at least replace General Deckley. Unfortunately, suspicions of a deeper plot remain only that, and the Duke's political influence in Serral is too pervasive to threaten him or those loyal to him prematurely. In truth, both Duke General Degrel and General Deckley are deeply involved in a perfidious plot. The full scope of its treachery is known to very few, as the Duke has maintained a convincing facade as a self-centered dilettante. His affected mannerisms and eccentric interactions with his peers have caused the Royal Assembly to underestimate his ambition. Secretly, the Duke and many high-ranking officers of the 4th are in collusion with a number of dissatisfied Cygnar nobles who are actively plotting against their king. They have been contacted with agents of Vinter Rathorn IV, who remains in exile, and they believe the Elder would reward them for restoring him to the throne. While in the process of moving the soldiers east, the 4th clashed with a large force of Trollken, led by Chief Madrak Ironhide. These militant Trollken had previously seized the region in northern Cygnar called Crail Valley on the grounds that Cygnar's kings had reneged on his promises. King Leto had hoped to find an amicable solution to this dispute and advised his military subordinates not to directly confront the Trollken. The 4th ignored these orders and committed their full strength in uprooting the Trollken bandits, quote-unquote. This clash resulted in high casualties on both sides, but the 4th has proclaimed it a great victory. They succeeded in driving the Creels from the farmlands and restored it to their previous owners. General Decals claims he did not disobey orders, but was reacting to an unprovoked assault on his soldiers during their transit, which included the seizure of the Cygnaran army hospital train carrying a dozen of wounded soldiers. Public sentiment in the region strongly supports the measures taken by the Fourth, as northern Cygnarans have little sympathy for the Trollbloods Creels. These fights endeared the Fourth Army and Duke Darograd to many northern nobles, who resent King Leto for ignoring requests of military aid. Unknown except to those few generals and commanders in the Fourth, these battles also provided the means to cull the army of officers and soldiers who might be an obstacle to the Duke's future goals. Many vocal supporters of King Leto's and those who questioned the Fourth's ruthless tactics were tragically killed in these battles. Tragically is quoted. Most of the soldiers of the Fourth are not part of this conspiracy and fight instead with the goal of restoring Cygnar to its former greatness. Yet even among the enlisted there are common-held beliefs that King Leto is weak, a recurring sentiment that have been voiced to the renewal of the old strength once embodied by the Rathorn's line can hope to save their king in this dark hour. And lastly, for this part one, because we're going to have to split this over two parts, because the newest archives come a few years later, and a switching of the kings, but not the king you think. Well, the king you probably know about if you've heard anything about Cygnaran history, but we'll get to that. But before we end this, we're going to talk about the Storm Division, 6th Division, Lord Commander Coleman Stryker. And their little quote thing is a bringing the thunder, which makes sense because they are all storm knights, or at least most of them. The 6th Division was once the primary garrison for Caspia, but its role evolved considerably after the promotion of Coleman Stryker to Lord Commander. On Lord Commander Stryker's orders, the division was transformed for the purpose of seizing Seoul from the Protectorate of Menoth. Soon the forces known as the Storm Division became the largest division in the Cygnaran army. At one point the soldiers comprised nearly 2/3 of the entire Second Army and numbered almost 100,000 personnel. These forces served as the forefront of the Caspian Seoul War and fought alongside their Lord Commander when the war was brought to a close with the death of Hierarch Foyle. While Seoul remained unconquered, the Storm Division proved the viability of Stryker's vision for a cohesion and aggressive assault force. The division employs traditional Cygnaran application of ranged firepower to cover the advance of an overwhelmingly concentration of Storm Knights. This division is now completely removed from the structure of Cygnar's 4 armies and has been given its own supply chain and support staff. The newly commissioned 8th Division has replaced the 6th as the garrison of Caspia, and the size of the 6th has been considerably reduced to maximize the combat flexibility. Former elements of the 6th have been returned to the 2nd Army or reallocated elsewhere. The new purpose of the Storm Division is to serve as a mobile strike force that can be sent wherever required. Most recently, it moved north from its old garrison in Caspia to support the border defenses against Kodor, and Lord Stryker has been asked to coordinate his efforts with General Nemo. While the Storm Division can theoretically deploy anywhere, there are limits to how fast tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of warjacks can move. The division travels as often as it needs of various conflicts require, typically serving for several months in one region before moving on to the next. Smaller forces of the regiment, battalion, and company levels can be deployed more easily on shorter notice. And let's see how big this is. Leadership. It is led by Lord Commander Coleman Stryker, Major Marcus Brisbane, Captain Alistair Kane, Captain Jeremiah Cray, and then the commanders are Bradier, Applegate, Calivert, Montfort, and Ghent. And its assets, not including support personnel, because, we're going to focus on the soldiers here, 9,700 Storm Knights, 6,100 Long Gunners, 4,250 Trenchers, 1,750 Sword Knights, 500 Precursor Knights, 300 of other soldiers of different stuff, including Gun Mages, Stormsmiths, and Rangers. Warjack chassis support. They have over 100 heavy warjacks, favoring Stormclads, Ironclads, and Defenders, and then over 200 light warjacks of all chassis types, favoring Chargers and Fireflies. These warcasters are not permanently attached to the Storm Division, but presently report to Lord Commander Stryker, so they switch out depending on who's best qualified for that particular battle. But that will do us for part 1 of the Cygnaran history, because we are well into an hour at this point. Part 2 is going to be a few years after these particular things, so of course we'll get into the Crixian Thornwood Wars and all that fun stuff as well, and the switching of the rulers of Cygnar as well. But we will have to wait on that until next week. Now that we're here, thank you guys so much if you still are listening to class. If you could, please like, comment, subscribe, let your friends and fellow gamers know about this particular course, because that does help keep the steam train rolling. And let us know what your favorite branch of their military is. Is it the 1st, 2nd, 4th, or the Storm Division? Depending on how you guys like to play with lightning and such. But a big shout out, thank you again to Steamforge Games for letting us continue to read this a fantastic history. And as always, class dismissed.